He was sleeping inside his old wooden cabin by the Blackfoot River when a strange sound suddenly pulled him awake. Benjamin, a 70-year-old man living alone in the Rocky Mountains of Montana, stepped outside and froze at what he saw. In the middle of the icy, raging river, a lynx was struggling to stay alive, clinging desperately to a drifting log. After 3 days of relentless snowstorms, the small creature was trembling, exhausted, and only moments away from death. There was no one else around, no time to hesitate, just an old man and a fragile life standing on the edge between survival and loss. What Benjamin didn't know was that saving this lynx would pull him into something far darker than a simple rescue. The wounds on the animal's body were not caused by nature alone. Why were there clear signs of a trap around Storm's neck? And how did a small discovery made that night lead the police to uncover a ruthless, illegal wildlife trafficking network that had operated in secret for years? Before we dive into this powerful and unexpected story, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of our upcoming true animal rescue stories. The wind, a primal scream echoing through the Montana Rockies, had finally begun to ebb. And Benjamin, a man whose 70 years had etched lines of wisdom and solitude around his kind eyes, pushed himself from the warmth of his bed. The air in his secluded cabin, usually a sanctuary of quiet reflection, now hummed with the aftershocks of a blizzard that had raged for 3 days, burying the world in a pristine, dangerous blanket of white. His gaze, accustomed to the subtle language of the wilderness, moved to the window, where the first hint of a bruised dawn painted the eastern sky. What he saw defied even his seasoned expectations. The Blackfoot River, usually a swift but contained current, had swollen into a frigid, treacherous monster. Its banks, once clearly defined, were now a chaotic expanse of churning ice, uprooted trees and debris, all rushing downstream with a terrifying, relentless power. The familiar wilderness, his home for decades, had been transformed into an alien, hostile landscape. A knot of unease tightened in Benjamin's stomach. He brewed a strong pot of coffee, the aroma momentarily cutting through the lingering chill, and began his routine check of the cabin, making sure no pipes had burst, no windows cracked under the storm's fierce assault. As he ventured out onto the porch, the biting wind stealing his breath, his eyes scanned the devastation. Pines lay felled, their branches heavy with snow. The river roared, a guttural warning. And then, a flicker of movement, something out of place amidst the chaos of logs and broken ice. It was on a massive, ancient pine trunk, half submerged, drifting precariously close to a particularly violent eddy. Benjamin squinted, his heart quickening. Whisper the Bobcat clung to the rough bark, the world a terrifying blur of cold and noise. The log, her unsteady refuge, bucked and spun. The cold seeped into her bones, an agonizing ache that made her teeth chatter uncontrollably. Her tiny claws, usually so adept at gripping, felt numb, barely holding. Water, icy and relentless, slapped at her, threatening to drag her under. She had known hunger, had known the sting of a larger predator's shadow, but this was an all-consuming terror, a helpless, endless fall. Her muscles, taut with exhaustion, screamed with every attempt to adjust her footing. A large, dark shape on the distant bank, unmoving, became a pinprick of focus in the swirling chaos, a giant looming against the gray sky. It was too big, too still, too human. Fear, sharp and instinctual, flared, despite the overriding despair. Benjamin didn't hesitate. The Bobcat was barely more than a kitten, its small body shuddering with cold and terror. Its fur, usually so distinctive with its spots, was matted and dark, plastered to its frame. He knew the river, he knew the dangers, but the sheer vulnerability in those wide, golden eyes, the desperate grip of tiny claws on the icy wood, stirred something deep within him, an echo of his years protecting the vulnerable in this very wilderness. He grabbed the thickest rope he had, his old waders, and a sturdy gaff hook. His hands, though aged, still retained the strength and dexterity of a man who had spent a lifetime in demanding environments. The giant moved, slowly, deliberately. It extended a long, dark stick towards her, its end a strange, curved hook. Instinct screamed danger, but the cold, the relentless motion, the utter exhaustion, it dulled the urgency of escape. Her muscles were screaming. She watched the stick, a flicker of movement from the giant's massive hand. It was an arm, then a long, dark, unfamiliar object. Every instinct urged her to hiss, to lash out, but she was too weak, too cold. Her body trembled violently. Her jaw, set tight with cold, ached. The scent of the river, pine, of something unfamiliar but not immediately threatening, filled her nostrils. Benjamin worked with practiced precision, his movements slow and deliberate, designed to avoid startling the terrified animal. He knew one wrong move could send it into the raging current. The gaff hook was not for harming, but for guidance, for snaring the log and pulling it closer to the bank. The wind, though calmer, still whipped around him, carrying the roar of the river. He could see the bobcat's chest heaving, its fear palpable even from a distance. Its eyes, the color of wet amber, darted between him and the terrifying water. The giant's eyes, two dark pools and a weathered face, stared at her. They weren't the hungry eyes of a wolf, nor the indifferent eyes of a deer. They were steady, unblinking. It was still so big, so utterly overwhelming. But there was a strange lack of menace. The cold, however, was a menace, a relentless, piercing menace. Her small body, no bigger than a large house cat, felt brittle, ready to shatter. She tried to flatten herself, to become one with the log, but her shivering betrayed her. The ground, the steady, solid ground, seemed impossibly far away. It took Benjamin nearly an hour, his old bones protesting the cold and the strain, to finally maneuver the log close enough to a calmer eddy. The bobcat, despite her fear, had remained on the log, too weak, too cold to try and jump. He used another rope, secured to a sturdy tree, to gently pull the log fully onto the bank, away from the immediate danger of the flood. He moved slowly, deliberately, giving the animal space. He could see now the raw, chapped pads of its paws, the way its fur was stiff with frozen water. It was hypothermic, close to death. The solid ground, when it finally arrived, was a strange, numb sensation under her numb paws. It was still cold, still white, but it didn't move. The roaring sound lessened slightly, replaced by the crackle of ice and the rustle of the giant. He was still there, but now he was lower, on his knees, holding a thick, soft thing. A new scent, warm and comforting, reached her. Her muscles were screaming. Every instinct told her to run, to flee from this massive, unpredictable being. But her legs refused to obey. Her body felt like stone. She watched the blanket, its soft folds, and the giant's slow, deliberate movements. She flattened herself, trying to disappear into the white. Benjamin moved with the quiet grace of a seasoned woodsman, extending the blanket slowly, talking in a low, soothing voice. He knew the animal wouldn't understand his words, but the tone, the gentleness, could sometimes pierce through the fear. He didn't try to touch it yet. He simply placed the blanket nearby, hoping the warmth would eventually draw it in. This wasn't just about rescue. It was about rehabilitation, about rebuilding trust. The bobcat was terrified, but something in its eyes, a deep exhaustion, suggested it might be too weak to resist. The thought of its tiny body, so vulnerable against the raw power of the Blackfoot, made a fresh wave of determination surge through him. He wouldn't let this little creature succumb to the wild's harsh indifference. Not now, not on his watch. The chill wind, a familiar enemy, no longer cut through the matted fur of the bobcat. Instead, a new, more profound cold gripped him, the bone-deep terror of being utterly vulnerable. He was trapped, not by the rising water that had swept him from his den, but by the relentless, unblinking gaze of the towering creature before him. A human, Benjamin. The bobcat's raw, untamed stare, usually a weapon, now revealed a shocking secret beyond just survival. It screamed a betrayal. Benjamin knew approaching a wild animal, especially one injured and terrified, was incredibly risky. Every instinct honed over 70 years in these mountains screamed caution. The bobcat, A splash of ginger and black against the dull wood of the makeshift raft was clearly in agony. Its fierce golden eyes, despite its weakness, still burned with an untamed wildness, a suspicion so deep it felt ancient. Weak snarls, more like rusty coughs, punctuated Benjamin's attempts to draw closer, each one a desperate plea for distance, a warning against intrusion. Benjamin's own breath hitched, not from fear, but from a burgeoning sense of responsibility. He saw the tremble in the creature's lean frame, the way its breath hitched in shallow gasps. And then he saw it. A severe, ragged wound on its hind leg, already swollen and glistening unnaturally, was one thing. A clear sign of misfortune, but the strange, dark rope cinched tightly around its neck, almost disappearing into the thick fur, was another entirely. It wasn't a snare that had caught it by accident. No, this was a deliberate act, a cruel tether, signaling not just an accident, but a premeditated injury, an act of human malice. The discovery hit Benjamin like a physical blow. The bobcat wasn't just injured, it had been tormented. This painful revelation ignited a fierce resolve in Benjamin. He would save this creature, no matter the cost, no matter the risk. The giant's hands, so impossibly large, moved with a strange, slow purpose. The bobcat flinched, teeth bared, a desperate growl rumbling in his chest. But a wave of dizzying pain shot through him, sapping his strength. He felt a soft cloth being draped over him, then the terrifying sensation of being lifted. His injured legs screamed in protest, and a sharp, unfamiliar scent filled his nostrils before darkness claimed him. He awoke to a different world. No more cold wind, no more treacherous water. Instead, a dull ache throbbed in his hind leg, but the searing pain had lessened, replaced by a strange, numbing warmth. The rope around his neck, once a suffocating weight, was gone. He felt the soft give of a thick, unfamiliar surface beneath him, a warmth radiating from it. His eyes, still clouded with residual fear, slowly adjusted to a dim, enclosed space. Walls, not trees, not sky, a cage. Fear, cold and sharp, coiled in his gut. But then, a new scent, subtle and comforting, drifted towards him. Something familiar, yet different. Food. He didn't trust it. He hadn't trusted anything for days, weeks maybe. But the hunger, a gnawing emptiness, was a more primal urge than fear. A shallow bowl filled with something rich and meaty sat just inside the bars. He eyed it suspiciously, a low growl rumbling, but the scent was intoxicating. He crept forward, every muscle tense, ready to spring back at the slightest threat. The first taste was heavenly, a burst of flavor that momentarily drowned out the fear. He ate, quickly at first, then more slowly, savoring each bite, the warmth spreading through his starved body. The giants came and went. Benjamin, the one who had pulled him from the water, and another, a smaller, softer giant, whose voice was a gentle murmur. They moved with a slowness that seemed designed to reassure, their hands always visible, never sudden. He watched their every move, his ears swiveling, cataloging every sound, every scent. He learned their patterns, the soft clink of a bowl, the rustle of a blanket, the low, comforting tones of their voices. One day, the smaller giant approached with a syringe. Fear, raw and instinctual, flared within him. He snarled, flattened his ears, a desperate attempt to ward off the inevitable, but a soft hand, so gentle it barely registered, stroked his head, and then a quick, sharp prick on his flank. A sting, hot and momentary, followed by a wave of drowsiness that pulled him back into a dreamless sleep. When he woke, the ache in his leg was even duller, a distant memory rather than a present torment. He felt lighter somehow, cleaner. Days blurred into weeks. The fear, once a constant companion, began to recede, replaced by a cautious curiosity. He still watched the giants, but now he observed their movements with less trepidation, more analysis. He learned to associate their presence with food, with clean water, with the soft, comforting weight of a fresh blanket. The small cage gave way to a larger enclosure, a space with soft earth, a climbing structure, and the scent of pine. A tiny patch of sun warmed his fur as he stretched, feeling strength return to his limbs. The wound on his leg was healing, a thin line of pink scar tissue replacing the raw gash. He still limped sometimes, a ghost of the past, but the pain was gone. The giants, Benjamin and the other, often sat near his enclosure, talking in low, soothing voices. He didn't understand their words, but the tone, the gentle cadence, seeped into his wary heart. He found himself sometimes pressing against the wire mesh, allowing their scent to linger, a strange new comfort in a world that had once offered only harshness. The memory of the rope, the deliberate cruelty, still flickered in the dark corners of his mind, but it was slowly being eclipsed by the quiet, unwavering kindness of these strange, benevolent giants. Trust, either fragile and nascent, was beginning to bloom. The Bobcat Ember felt the relentless pull of the river, each ripple a cold, wet hand trying to pry her from her precarious perch. Her injured leg throbbed, a dull, insistent ache that had sharpened into a searing fire with every bump and jostle of the log against the rocks. She could smell the giant, a scent of old wood smoke, and something sharp, metallic. Fear, perhaps, or desperation. He was moving, a lumbering shadow against the dull glint of the water, pushing something long and flat towards her. A bridge or another trap. Her world had become a series of snares and sudden drops. The forest's once familiar scents now muddled with panic. Benjamin, his knuckles white against the worn wood of the plank, pushed it inch by agonizing inch towards the Bobcat. The current fought him, eager to reclaim his makeshift bridge. She was a bundle of desperate nerves, all sleek muscle coiled tight, ready to spring, even if it meant plunging into the icy depths. He remembered his old fishing net, still tangled by the cabin. A risky move, but time was a luxury neither of them possessed. Retrieving it, he fashioned a rudimentary scoop, the net sagging like a tired spiderweb. He lunged a desperate sweep of the net, but she was quicker, a flash of mottled fur. The net snagged only water and a single frantic yowl that tore at his heart. He tried again, and again, the net a clumsy extension of his own shaking hand. Each failure sent a jolt of despair through him, mirroring the Bobcat's renewed terror. Her muscles were taut with the effort of clinging, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The sun was dipping lower, casting long, bruised shadows across the water. Darkness, and the cold that came with it, would be a death sentence. Then a memory, soft as a whisper from a long-lost campfire tale. Old Man Hemlock, they called him, who'd calmed a runaway bear cub by pretending to sleep, by making himself small and unthreatening. Benjamin looked at the swift, unforgiving water, and then at the trembling creature. What did he have to lose? Slowly, deliberately, Benjamin eased himself onto the wooden plank. The cold seeped through his worn jacket, but he ignored it. He lay there, flat on his back, the net forgotten beside him, his eyes closed. He willed his breathing to slow, his heart to stop its frantic drum. He imagined himself a log, another piece of flotsam in the river, harmless. The silence stretched thick and heavy, broken only by the insistent murmur of the current. Ember watched. The giant had stopped moving. He was still, no longer lunging, no longer roaring, just a vast, unmoving presence. Her eyes, wide and dilated with fear, scanned his face. No threat there, just a strange, rhythmic breathing. Her own body ached, a deep, bone-weary exhaustion settling into her limbs. The cold was seeping into her very core. Curiosity, a dangerous instinct, warred with her instinct for flight. But flight meant the water, and the water meant more pain, more cold. Very slowly, one hesitant paw at a time, she began to creep. Each movement was a calculated risk, a gamble against the unknown. Her matted fur brushed against the rough wood of the plank, sending shivers down her spine. Closer, closer until she could smell him. Not just fear, but something else now. A warm, comforting scent, like old hearth embers. He felt the light brushes of fur against his arm, the soft weight of her breath on his cheek. It was now or never. One swift, practiced motion, Benjamin rolled, the net unfurling, encompassing her small, trembling body. A shriek, sharp and piercing, erupted from her. She bucked a desperate, frantic struggle against the confining mesh. Her claws, needle-sharp, scraped against the netting, but the injury to her leg held her back, twisting her body with a fresh wave of agony. A whimper, a pained, guttural cry, tore from her throat. He felt the rapid thrum of her heart against his own, a wild drum beat of pure terror. Benjamin held her gently but firmly, feeling the desperate tremor in her small frame. He knew that sound, the raw, unbridled agony of a creature in pain. He lifted her, cradling the struggling bundle to his chest, the faint smell of wildness and fear filling his nostrils. The sharp, constricted gasp of air she took, the way her body went momentarily rigid, told him all he needed to know. Her leg, it was worse than he'd imagined. He carried her the rest of the way to his cabin, the familiar path now a blur of urgency. Inside, the warm, comforting scent of wood smoke filled the air. He laid her on a clean blanket on his old kitchen table, her small body still heaving with silent sobs. The rope, dark and sinister, was cutting deeply into her flesh, a cruel tourniquet. With hands that trembled only slightly, Benjamin reached for his sharpest utility knife. The soft gleam of the blade caught the lamplight. This was the moment, the first step on a long, winding road to healing. Trust would come later, if it came at all. For now, there was only the immediate, desperate need to free her from the pain. He made the cut. The scent of something sharp, medicinal, pricked at the bobcat's nose. His head, heavy and throbbing, shifted. The world around him was a blur of soft light and the low murmur of the giant's voice. He felt a soft, warm pressure on his leg, a strange sensation that was both alien and, to his surprise, not entirely unwelcome. Fear was a raw, primal thing in his belly, but a deeper, more profound exhaustion seemed to hold it at bay. He was so tired of the biting cold, the hunger, the relentless ache. The giant's touch was surprisingly gentle as it probed the worst of the burning pain on his leg. A soft, damp cloth, cool against his inflamed skin, brought a fleeting moment of relief before a sharper sting. He tensed, a low growl rumbling in his chest. But the giant's hand didn't flinch, didn't tighten its grip. Instead, a soothing, rhythmic stroke began on his head, just behind his ears, a place he hadn't realized was so desperate for comfort. The scent of fear was still strong, not just his own, but something else, something metallic and sharp, lingering on the wound. This was not a wound from a fall, not a tumble down a rocky slope. This was something deliberate, something cruel. He remembered the sudden, crushing impact, the terrifying click, and the relentless, searing agony that followed. As Benjamin carefully cleaned the raw, angry gash on the bobcat's leg, his breath hitched. The jagged edges, the way the flesh was torn and bruised in a precise, cruel circle, it wasn't from a fall. It was the unmistakable mark of a leg-hold trap. His jaw tightened, a cold dread replacing the earlier warmth of compassion. He'd seen these wounds countless times in his ranger days, each one a testament to human barbarity. But then, as he reached for more antiseptic, his fingers brushed against something else, something small and stiff, concealed within the frayed rope still clinging to the bobcat's neck. He carefully worked the tiny folded square of paper free. It was almost microscopic, barely thicker than a spider web. His old eyes, even with his reading glasses perched on his nose, struggled to decipher the smudged script. The note, barely legible, written in a hasty, almost panicked hand, read, "Culligan, 445 River Road." The name hit Benjamin like a physical blow. Jake Culligan, the notorious poacher, a ghost he'd chased for years during his time with the Fish and Wildlife Service, always slipping through his fingers. Culligan, known for his brutal traps, his illegal trade in animal parts, his utter disregard for life. This bobcat, this fragile, injured creature, was more than just a rescue. It was a victim and a crucial piece of evidence. A righteous fury, dormant for years, flared in Benjamin's chest, hot and unyielding. The bobcat felt a sudden shift in the giant's demeanor. The careful, measured movements became a little stiffer. The soft murmuring stopped. A new scent, sharper, more defined than the medicinal one, filled the air around him. Anger. It wasn't directed at him, he instinctively knew, but at something unseen, something the giant held in his hand. He watched with a wary eye as the giant's face, etched with concern moments before, hardened into a grim mask. The pain in his leg, though dulled, was a constant thrum, a reminder of the unseen horror. But something else was present now, a different kind of strength emanating from the giant, a fierce protectiveness that, despite his fear, offered a strange, unexpected comfort. He might still be scared, but he was no longer alone in this cold, harsh world. The world had shrunk to a sharp, insistent throb in her leg, the gentle rhythm that had begun to lull her into a fragile sense of safety, the warmth that had started to feel less like a trap and more like a den, was abruptly shattered. A new, terrifying sensation pulsed through her, a spreading fire that tightened her chest and made each breath a shallow, painful gasp. The big, slow-moving giant, Benjamin, who had brought her the sweet, clear water in the soft, palatable bits of meat, was now a source of quiet anxiety. His scent, once a comforting anchor, now carried an underlying tremor of urgency. The light in the den shifted, becoming harsher, and the giant's movements, usually deliberate and predictable, grew hesitant, then swift. She tried to flatten herself further into the soft bedding, to become invisible, but the pain wouldn't allow it. It commanded her every instinct, screaming, "Danger!" A new, metallic smell mingled with the familiar scent of wood smoke and the giant's skin. It was sharp, sterile, yet unsettling. Her body, already a battlefield, tensed further. She felt a large hand, rough but surprisingly gentle, press against her side. A soft, rumbling sound, low and worried, emanated from the giant's throat. She whimpered, a weak, reedy sound that barely left her own throat. The throbbing in her leg intensified, a deep, sickening ache that resonated through her very bones. The giant shifted, and she saw him reach for something, gleaming under the weak light. Her instincts shrieked at the sight of the unnatural implements. She wanted to flee, to disappear into the comforting blackness of the night, but her body felt heavy, unresponsive. The next sensation was a searing, shocking pain, unlike anything she had felt before. It originated directly from the source of the persistent throb in her leg. She cried out, a guttural shriek that scraped her throat. Her body convulsed, desperate to escape the new agony. The giant's touch, still gentle, became firmer, holding her steady. She felt a tearing, a pulling sensation, then a gush of warmth that was quickly followed by a cleaner, less putrid smell. It was still pain, profound and overwhelming, but somehow distinctly different. The sharp metallic smell intensified. She could hear the giant breathing heavily, a sound of strained concentration that mirrored her own fight for air. His voice, a low murmur, was a continuous stream of soft sounds. Not quite understandable, but carrying an unmistakable tone of reassurance. After what felt like an eternity, the sharp, tearing pain subsided, replaced by a dull, persistent ache. She felt something cold and wet being pressed against the wound, then the familiar feel of bandages, wrapped more securely this time. The giant's hands, though still large and overwhelming, were now movements of comfort, not invasion. She was exhausted, drained of every ounce of fight. The world spun in dizzying circles, but the suffocating pressure in her chest had eased, and her breathing, though still shallow, felt less desperate. He spoke again, that low, rumbling sound, and then she felt a faint warmth spread through her body. Not the burning fire of the infection, but a gentle, pervasive heat that soothed her aching muscles. Sleep, deep and consuming, pulled her under. But even in the darkness, there was a faint memory of the giant's touch, a lingering warmth, and the distant echo of his soft voice. The throbbing pain was still there, a constant reminder of the ordeal, but it felt distant, muted, as if a thick layer of moss had grown over it. When she finally stirred, the light was softer and the air carried the comforting scent of wood smoke. The pain in her leg was still present, but it was no longer the all-consuming fire. It was a dull, manageable ache, a shadow of its former intensity. The giant, Benjamin, was a blurry shape nearby, his steady breathing a new rhythm in her world. He was still enormous, still a source of primal caution, but now mixed with that caution was something else, something new and unfamiliar. A burgeoning flicker of trust born from the crucible of pain and the strange, rough tenderness of his hands. He had caused her immense pain, yes, but he had also brought relief. He was the thunder and the rain, the storm and the calm. The world was a confusing blur of smells and vibrations, a cacophony that assaulted the Bobcat's raw nerves. Each breath was a shallow ache, each movement a fresh stab of protest from her battered body. The memory of the icy grip of the river, the rough wood pressing into her side, the overwhelming scent of humans, it all swirled into a terrifying miasma. She'd known only the cold bite of fear and the relentless gnaw of hunger for what felt like an eternity. Now a different kind of sensation enveloped her, a strange warmth, a soft cushion beneath her, and the omnipresent heavy scent of the old human. He was a giant, his voice a low rumble, his movements slow and deliberate. Yet every approach sent a jolt of terror through her weakened frame. Days bled into a hazy continuum of discomfort and grudging tolerance. The human Benjamin would appear, his scent preceding him, a mix of old wood smoke and something sweet, medicinal. He would carefully lift a cloth, revealing the angry red wound on her leg, and then something cool, then stinging, would be applied. A guttural growl would rumble deep in her chest, a warning that often went unheeded, or perhaps understood, but respectfully ignored. He always moved with a deliberate slowness that, over time, began to chip away at the solid block of her fear. The sting would fade, replaced by a dull ache, and then a strange, soothing warmth would spread. He'd leave small, enticing pieces of meat, raw, delicious, and crucially, always fresh. The hunger, a constant companion for so long, began to recede, replaced by a tentative sense of satiation. There was a peculiar rhythm to their days, the gentle rustle of bedding, the clink of metal bowls, the low hum of the human's voice as he spoke to her, soft and steady. She didn't understand the words, of course, but the cadence, the deep resonance began to seep into her consciousness, less a threat and more a constant presence. One evening, after the pain in her leg had subsided into a manageable throb, and a deep, comforting warmth had settled in her belly from a particularly satisfying meal, a faint purr involuntarily vibrated through her chest. It was a rusty sound, long unused, a hesitant acknowledgement of the strange peace that had begun to settle over her. Benjamin paused, his hand hovering, then slowly, almost reverently, he lowered it. He looked at her then, a long, thoughtful gaze, and she felt a strange shift within herself. It was as if he saw not just a wild creature, broken and fearful, but something more. He murmured a word, "Storm," and the sound resonated with the memories of the blizzard, the unforgiving wind, the relentless snow that had almost claimed her. It was a name that echoed the tempest she had endured, the raw power of nature that had both nearly destroyed and inadvertently saved her. Storm. The word felt heavy, yet comforting, a new identity given to her in this strange, warm den. The naming was a profound shift. Before, she was simply the Bobcat, a nameless entity driven by instinct and fear. Now she was Storm. The human had given her a name, a distinction, and with it, an unspoken promise. She was no longer just a survivor of the wild, a victim of circumstance. She was Storm, a creature with a past etched in ice and wind, but now a future held in the gentle hands of this quiet giant. The memory of the stinging needle, the rough handling by strangers, it all began to recede, replaced by the warmth of the blanket, the taste of clean water, the reassuring rhythm of Benjamin's presence. The fear was still there, a thin layer, but beneath it, something new was beginning to unfurl, a fragile sprout of trust, nurtured by small acts of unwavering care. The scent of disinfectant, The soft hum of machinery and the gentle rhythm of Benjamin's breathing had lulled Storm the Bobcat into a fitful slumber. Her small body, no longer racked with the agony of the trap, twitched occasionally as old fears resurfaced. But a deeper, unfamiliar warmth now permeated her. Benjamin, however, found no such peace. With Storm stable, curled in a heated recovery kennel, his thoughts returned, sharp and unyielding, to Jake Culligan and the grim discovery that had brought the Storm into his world. The cruel precision of the trap, the callousness of the note, it all solidified into a burning conviction. He picked up the receiver of his old rotary phone, the plastic cool against his fingers. The number for the local sheriff's department was etched into his memory, a relic from a lifetime spent in these woods. He dialed slowly, deliberately, each turn of the dial a step closer to confronting the darkness that had preyed on these creatures for too long. When Sheriff Miller's gruff voice answered, Benjamin didn't mince words. He reported the trapped Bobcat, Storm, detailing the location, the nature of the snare, and then, with a voice that brooked no argument, he described the incriminating note. Jake Culligan's work, Sheriff. Clear as day. He practically signed it. Despite his age, the years of quiet observation and deep understanding of the wild gave Benjamin's voice an unexpected authority, a gravitas that commanded attention. It wasn't just about Storm anymore. It was about every creature that had fallen victim to Culligan's cruel sport. It was about justice, pure and unyielding. Sheriff Miller, a man who had seen Benjamin's reputation for fairness and his sharp eye for detail in the infrequent local disputes, listened intently. He knew Culligan's history, the whispered rumors of illegal trapping and poaching that had always skirted the edges of concrete evidence. Understood, Benjamin, the sheriff said, his voice hardening. We'll send a unit out there immediately. This is serious. A quiet sense of resolve settled over Benjamin. He knew this was his chance, the best chance he'd had in years to finally bring down the poacher who had terrorized the local wildlife for so long. He wasn't just protecting Storm, but countless other creatures from a similar, brutal fate. The image of the struggling Bobcat, her magnificent wild spirit dimmed by pain and fear, was seared into his mind, a constant reminder of the urgent need for action. He hung up the phone, the silence of the kitchen now filled with the echo of his commitment. Later that evening, after the sheriff's deputy had taken Benjamin's statement and collected the evidence, Benjamin sat by Storm's kennel. The Bobcat, despite her pain, had already begun to show fleeting glimpses of her wild resilience. She watched him with intelligent, wary eyes, her small bob tail twitching occasionally. He spoke to her softly, his voice a low rumble, telling her about the woods, about the safety she would find, about the justice he intended to pursue on her behalf. He described the towering pines, the cool, clear streams, the rustling leaves that whispered secrets of the forest. He talked about the other animals, the deer, the rabbits, the occasional fox that would cross his path. He hoped that somehow, some instinctual part of her understood, that his words were a promise of a future, a world where she could run free, unhindered by human cruelty. It was a silent pact between them, a shared understanding forged in the crucible of her suffering and his resolve. He watched as Storm finally, cautiously stretched her neck and took a tentative bite of the offered food, a small piece of cooked chicken. It wasn't much, but it was a start. A flicker of hope ignited within him. The call had been made. The wheels of justice were turning. And for Storm, the road to recovery had just begun. A journey that would ultimately lead her back to the wild, a testament to resilience and a beacon against the darkness. The air thrummed with a different kind of tension than the quiet aftermath of the flood. Benjamin, at 70, knew his place wasn't on the front lines, but his resolve to accompany Sheriff Brody to 445 River Road was unwavering. His old bones might protest, but his spirit was ready for whatever lay hidden within Culligan's property. Culligan, the notoriously reclusive poacher, whose house had, by some twisted stroke of luck, largely escaped the river's wrath, was about to face a reckoning. As the convoy of patrol cars snaked down the muddy track toward the property, a sense of unease settled in the pit of Benjamin's stomach. This wasn't just about a few illegal traps. Benjamin had a hunch it was far more sinister. Through his binoculars, he saw movement near a dilapidated shed. Culligan, a wiry man with shifty eyes, was frantically trying to move what looked like concealed cages. The game was afoot. The command to move in echoed, and officers fanned out, converging on the shed. The scent hit Benjamin first, even from a distance. A sickening cocktail of fear, waste, and desperation. It was the smell of captivity, of life denied. The officers pulled back the tarps and rotten wood, revealing the horrors within. Dozens of animals, a silent testament to human cruelty, were crammed into cages barely large enough for them to turn around. One cage in particular held a young fox. Its once vibrant reddish-brown fur matted with grime, its intelligent eyes wide with terror, its ribs protruded sharply, a clear sign of starvation. The fox whimpered, a low, sorrowful sound that tore at Benjamin's heart. He recognized that sound, the raw fear that had gripped the bobcat, Storm, when she was clinging to the log, teetering on the edge of oblivion. Here it was multiplied, echoing in the confined spaces, a chorus of despair. Then came the coyotes, their intelligent faces gaunt, their usual wild cunning replaced by a dull acceptance of their fate, and a bear cub, no bigger than a large dog, whimpering softly, its dark eyes glazed over with hunger and bewilderment. Its rich, dark fur was surprisingly clean, but its small body shivered uncontrollably. Benjamin knew Culligan wasn't just trapping for sport. This was a well-oiled machine, trafficking these magnificent creatures for illegal sale, likely to exotic pet collectors or for their parts. The sheer scale was shocking. The sheriff, grim-faced, turned to Benjamin. Benjamin, your eye for the lay of the land, your knowledge of these woods. Anything else you see? Benjamin, his gaze sweeping over the ravaged property, began to walk, his experienced eyes scanning every detail. Disturbed earth, faint game trails leading away from obvious paths, patches of disturbed vegetation. He pointed to a subtle anomaly near a thicket of overgrown evergreens. Over there, Sheriff, see how that undergrowth is unnaturally flattened? And that small indentation in the mud, that's not natural runoff. Following Benjamin's lead, the officers uncovered more hidden traps, some empty but freshly set, others containing the grim remains of smaller creatures caught and left to die. Each discovery was a fresh stab to Benjamin's heart, a stark reminder of Storm's desperate struggle. He could almost hear the bobcat's terrified cries, the silent plea for help that had resonated with him so deeply. The rehabilitation process for these animals would be long, arduous, and heartbreaking. The fox, the coyote, the bear cub, they would carry the scars of this trauma, both visible and invisible. But Benjamin felt a surge of hope, too. Just like Storm, they would find sanctuary, a chance to heal. The sting of a tranquilizer dart, the unfamiliar warmth of a blanket, the taste of clean, fresh water after days of thirst. These would be their first steps toward trust. The raid on River Road had dismantled Culligan's entire illegal wildlife trafficking ring. The justice served that day wasn't just for the animals found alive, but for all the unseen victims, past and future. Benjamin felt a profound satisfaction, a quiet triumph. He was not just an old man who rescued a bobcat, he was an advocate, a silent warrior for the voiceless. The experience solidified his purpose, expanding his dedication beyond Storm. He knew with a certainty that settled deep in his bones that his work had just begun. He would ensure these creatures found their way back to health, back to the wild, or to safe havens where they could live out their days in peace. The world was a blur of swaying motion and unfamiliar sounds, a jarring contrast to the desperate stillness of the past days. Storm, the bobcat, felt the tremor of a new kind of confinement, not the biting steel of the trap, but a dark, enclosed space that moved beneath her. Her injured leg throbbed, a dull ache that resonated with the frantic beat of her own heart. The scent of pine and damp earth, so comforting in Benjamin's presence, was replaced by a sterile chemical odor that prickled her nostrils. Fear, a cold, familiar companion, coiled in her gut. She whimpered, a low, guttural sound she hadn't made since she was a kid, a sound that spoke of deep-seated terror and vulnerability. Then came the soft rumble of human voices, closer now, a gentle murmur that didn't hold the threat of the harsh shouts she'd learned to dread. The crate lurched, then settled. A sliver of light appeared, widening into a strange, brightly lit room. Giants again, but these moved with a slow, deliberate grace, their hands reaching out not with snares but with a different kind of intent. A poke, a brief, sharp sting in her flank, followed by a wave of warmth that spread through her, loosening the tight knots of fear in her muscles. Her eyelids grew heavy, her body relaxed, and the world dissolved into a hazy, dreamlike state. She awoke to a new kind of quiet, not the oppressive silence of the forest after a hunt, but a controlled hush, punctuated by soft clicks and the distant murmur of voices. In her injured leg, though still tender, it felt lighter, less a burning torment and more a persistent discomfort. The metallic scent was still present, but overlaid now with a faint, clean smell, almost like fresh linen. Her eyes, still wary, took in her surroundings. A spacious enclosure, not forest, but not the tight cage of her capture either. One wall was wire mesh, offering a tantalizing glimpse of a world beyond, blurred by glass. The floor was smooth and cool beneath her paws. A shadow fell over her. Her instincts screamed to flee, but her body, still heavy with the lingering effects of whatever the giant had given her, responded slowly. A new giant, this one smaller, younger, her scent less intimidating. This giant moved with a quiet reverence, her voice a soft, continuous stream of gentle sounds. Luna, the new giant called herself, though Storm only registered the soothing cadence. Luna brought food, not the tough, sinewy prey of the wild, but soft, palatable morsels that tasted of meat and something else, something nourishing. Storm ate cautiously, her ears twitching, watching the giant's every move. Days bled into weeks. The pain in her leg lessened. The gentle hands, initially met with a hiss and a snarl, became less threatening. Luna would speak to her, her voice a balm, and sometimes the giant Benjamin would appear, his familiar scent of pine and old wood, a momentary comfort in this strange new world. He would speak of the forest, of rustling leaves, and the calls of unseen birds, whispering promises of freedom that felt impossibly distant. The small giant, Luna, became a constant presence. She would sit quietly, sometimes for hours, reading or simply watching, her presence non-threatening. Storm learned the rhythm of her movements, the soft padding of her footsteps, the gentle way she placed the food bowls. She was a predictable giant, and predictability in this new world was a comfort. One day, a different set of giants came, their movements precise and their voices hushed. The fear returned, sharp and cold, as they coaxed her onto a soft, padded surface. More pokes, a deeper sleep. When she awoke, the throbbing in her leg was different, a clean, sharp ache that promised something new. The old painful damage they knew had been fully repaired. The new ache slowly subsided, replaced by a dull awareness. Luna continued her gentle ministrations, and gradually Storm began to associate the giant with relief, with sustenance, with a strange, nascent sense of security. The fear, though never entirely absent, began to recede into the deeper corners of her mind. She watched Luna with a new kind of curiosity, a glimmer of something beyond mere survival. The world outside her enclosure was still a mystery, but within these walls, with these predictable giants, the harshness of her past began to fade, replaced by the quiet, persistent hum of healing. Her body, once racked with pain, now felt whole, capable, if only she could truly trust these strange, gentle giants who offered not a trap, but a chance. The world, for so long a jarring cacophony of pain and terror, was beginning to soften around the edges. Storm, the Bobcat, still felt the tremor in her muscles, the deep-seated memory of the churning water, the frantic struggle against the unyielding wood. But now the sharp bite of cold was gone, replaced by a gentle warmth. The harsh light of day, once a blinding threat, was often filtered, softened by what felt like thick, woven barriers. The giant still loomed. The male, the first one to touch her, moved with a slow, deliberate grace that over time became less menacing. His voice, a low rumble, no longer sent her scrambling for the deepest corner of her temporary den. The smaller giant, Luna, was the one who brought sustenance. At first, the food was left, a silent offering, the scent of meat, a tantalizing lure that warred with the primal fear of approach. Her stomach ached, a hollow, insistent gnawing, but the instinct to flee, to hide, was stronger. She'd wait until the giants were gone, then snatch a mouthful, wolf it down, and retreat into the shadows. The initial sting of the needle, a sharp, momentary pain followed by a strange, heavy lethargy, was a confusing memory. It had been unpleasant, yes, but after, the throbbing ache in her leg had lessened. The constant burning fire in her paw, where the raw skin met the splinters, had cooled. She remembered the strange smell of antiseptic, the cool press of something soft wrapped around her limb, replacing the painful open wound with a dull pressure. It was a bizarre kind of magic, this healing. Days bled into weeks. The giants were consistent. Always food, always water. Always that low rumbling voice from Benjamin and the soft, coaxing whispers from Luna. One morning, the scent of fresh water was overpowering, a promise of cool relief after days of parched throat. When Luna approached, not leaving the bowl but holding it steady, Storm hesitated. Her tongue felt like sandpaper. Her instincts screamed danger, but the thirst was a more immediate, insistent master. She watched at Luna's large, calloused hand, her ears swiveling, trying to interpret the slow, steady rhythm of her breathing. A tiny, almost imperceptible tremor ran through Storm's body. Then, driven by desperation, she took a tentative sip. The water was cool, clean, a balm to her dry throat. Luna didn't move, just held the bowl, her eyes kind and unblinking, fixed on Storm. It was a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. Her physical wounds had knit together, leaving behind faint, almost imperceptible scars. A map of her past ordeal etched onto her tawny fur. But the deeper scars, the ones unseen, were taking longer to mend. Yet with each shared meal, each slow approach, each quiet moment of observation, the fear in her golden eyes began to recede. It was replaced by something new, something fragile and unfamiliar. Curiosity. She would watch Benjamin as he cleaned, her head tilted, analyzing his movements. She would follow Luna's gentle hand with her gaze, no longer flinching, but studying. The giantess's presence, once a threat, was slowly becoming a fixed, predictable point in her new, quiet world. Then came the morning when Luna approached with a piece of fresh meat. Instead of placing it down, she held it out. Storm's internal struggle was immense. Every instinct screamed, "Don't trust, don't get close." But the scent of the meat was powerful, and the soft, unwavering gaze of the giantess was different. Not threatening, not demanding, just patient. A long moment stretched, taut with unspoken communication. Storm took a tentative step forward, then another. Her nose twitched, her powerful senses absorbing every nuance of Luna's scent, the steady rhythm of her breathing. With a sudden, decisive lunge, she snatched the meat from Luna's hand, her teeth barely brushing the gloved skin. It was done. The act was quick, almost feral, but the trust, a fragile, almost invisible thread, had been spun. The fear had not vanished entirely, but for the first time, the raw hunger for kindness had won. It was a monumental step, a testament to the quiet power of gentle persistence, proving that even the deepest emotional wounds could begin to mend. The scent, a wild symphony of pine needles and damp earth, whispered promises Storm hadn't known she remembered. It was a familiar cadence, one that vibrated deep within her bones, echoing a freedom almost lost forever. Today was the day. Today, after endless days of soft blankets and gentle hands, after the confusing sting of needles followed by the soothing thrum of warmth, the world was calling her back. Her world. For so long, the world had been a dizzying blur of pain and cold. A vast, dark water had pulled at her, an insistent, hungry force that held her captive against a hard, unyielding thing. Fear had been a constant companion, a tightening knot in her chest. Then the giants came, huge looming shadows that had, at first, brought only more terror. Their touch, though, was different. It wasn't the biting cold of the water or the sharp agony of her injured paw. It was a strange, hesitant warmth, a softness she hadn't known existed. The smell of them, at first alien, had slowly become entwined with the scent of safety, of full bellies, and the quiet hum of their voices. Benjamin, the largest and kindest of the giants, had a particular smell, like old trees and something sweet. He was the one who had pulled her from the relentless grip of the water, a terrifying blur of motion and sound. The memory was fragmented, a jumble of panic in the brief, startling pressure of hands on her fur. The pinprick of the needle had always made her flinch, a sharp, quick sting that momentarily intensified the throbbing in her leg. But then a wave of drowsiness, a floating sensation would follow. She would wake to a different kind of pain, a dull ache that was less insistent, less urgent. And always there was the water, clean, cool water in a shallow dish, tasting of minerals and life. A stark contrast to the bitter, brackish water she'd nearly drowned in. Food, too. Soft, easily swallowed bits of meat that brought a comforting fullness to her empty belly, banishing the gnawing hunger that had consumed her. The giant's touch had transformed from frightening intrusions to gentle strokes. Light pats on her head, always accompanied by soft murmurs that, though meaningless in their exact words, conveyed reassurance. Luna, the smaller giant, had a high, melodic voice that soothed her more than once when the residual fear tried to claw its way back. Months had passed in this rhythm of healing and learning to trust. The enclosure, at first a confusing cage, had become a haven. She learned to stalk the toy mice they left for her, honing the instincts that had been dulled by pain and fear. Her muscles, once weak and trembling, grew strong again, ready to spring, to climb. Her coat, once matted and dull, now shone, a vibrant tapestry of tawny and black spots. Every day the urge to leap, to run, to feel the rough bark of a tree beneath her claws, grew stronger. The scent outside the enclosure, a rich tapestry of green things and hidden life, became an almost unbearable pull. And then, the day had come. A new enclosure, larger, smelling strongly of the wild, and then the transfer. A momentary confusion as she was guided into a different kind of transport, a cage that smelled of pine and damp earth. The journey was long, a rumbling motion, and the air shifted, growing cooler, carrying even stronger messages from the wild world. Benjamin and Luna were there, their familiar smells reassuring in the newness. The cage door opened. A rush of sensation, the scent of 1,000 growing things, the whisper of leaves, the distant call of a bird. Her senses exploded, recalibrating, remembering. She peered out, a cautious glance back at the two giants who stood silently, their faces unreadable, their forms still like ancient trees. A jolt, a surge of pure, unadulterated instinct propelled her forward. One powerful bound, then another. The soft earth beneath her paws, the rustle of leaves against her fur, the cool kiss of the air. She was a flash of tawny fur, a ghost among the trees, disappearing into the protective embrace of the forest, or the whisper of the wild. The call that had always been hers had finally brought her home. The memory of the water, the pain, the fear, began to recede, replaced by the boundless, exhilarating truth of her own strength, her own freedom. She was Storm, and she was wild. Benjamin watched Storm the Bobcat disappear into the dense, vibrant tapestry of the pine forest, a profound sense of peace settling over him. He knew she was where she belonged, wild and free, no longer a terrified, injured creature clinging precariously to a waterlogged log. In the quiet solitude that now enveloped him, a stillness only the deep woods could offer, he reflected on their improbable journey. He remembered the first glimpse of her, a matted, shivering bundle of fear against the relentless current, her eyes wide with primal terror as the cold water threatened to pull her under. The world had been a blur of rushing water and overwhelming sound then, a chaotic nightmare that threatened to consume her. She had been just a blur of instinct, a desperate cling to the rough bark, the only solid thing in a world turned liquid and hostile. The sudden appearance of the giant, Benjamin, had been another terror altogether. A huge shadow against the gray sky, an intimidating form blocking the wind. The strange noises, the low rumble of his voice, had been a foreign intrusion into her fight for survival. She'd braced for the worst, for the final, inescapable end. But then came the soft, firm touch, not a predator's grip, but something different. Something that scooped her from the churning water, a warmth she hadn't felt in days. The confusing scent of human, strong and alien, but somehow not threatening. The initial days had been a blur of fear and strange sensations. The enclosed space of the crate had felt like a trap, even with the soft blanket beneath her. The giants moved around her, their voices soft but their presence immense. A sharp, stinging prick in her flank had been followed by a strange lethargy, a dulling of the sharp edge of her terror. It was confusing. She expected pain, but instead a wave of warmth spread through her injured limb, easing the throbbing ache that had been her constant companion. Food appeared raw and delicious, unlike the meager scraps she'd been scavenging. Water, clean and cool, tasted like a miracle after the muddy river. The slow process of her body knitting itself back together had begun, piece by painful piece, under the watchful, if sometimes intimidating, eyes of the giants. Benjamin realized that saving Storm had, in many ways, saved a part of himself. Her resilience, her slow, cautious acceptance of his care, had rekindled his spirit, giving him a purpose he hadn't known he was missing. He remembered the first time her eyes, no longer clouded with pain or pure terror, had met his, a flicker of something akin to curiosity, perhaps even recognition, passing between them. That moment had been a revelation. The healing had been a slow dance between instinct and trust. Her injured leg, once a source of searing pain with every move, gradually regained its strength. The strange, sweet-smelling substances applied by the giants soothed the ache, and the soft, warm wraps protected the delicate skin. The smell of antiseptic, initially alarming, had come to symbolize relief. She learned that the sharp stabs of the needle were followed by a calm, a release from the relentless agony. The giants, though still formidable in size, had become less threatening, their movements slower, their voices softer when near her. They always brought food, always offered water, always checked her wounds with a gentle touch. It was a stark contrast to the harsh realities of the wild, where injury meant vulnerability, and vulnerability often meant death. Here, injury meant care. The transition to the outdoor enclosure had been a dizzying mix of freedom and apprehension. The smells were glorious. Pine needles, damp earth, the faint scent of deer. The sun on her back felt immense. Yet the enclosure still contained the giants. Benjamin, in particular, would often sit, a still, quiet presence. He didn't approach, didn't threaten, simply watched. This silent guardianship, this unspoken understanding slowly chipped away at her ingrained fear. She learned to stalk the crickets in the grass, to nap in the warmth of a sunbeam, to drink from the fresh pool, all while Benjamin observed from a distance a benevolent shadow. The bond formed between them, forged in the heart of a storm and refined through countless acts of gentle care, proved that compassion and understanding could indeed transcend the boundaries between humans and the wild. It was a bond that healed the deepest wounds, bringing about a true rebirth for both of them. Benjamin remained a silent guardian of the wilderness, forever carrying the memory of the bobcat named Storm. Her departure was not an ending, but a testament to her strength, into the quiet power of a shared journey. He understood now that her freedom was his greatest reward. The echoes of her wild cry, the flash of her tawny fur through the underbrush, would forever remind him of the transformative power of their connection. She had gone, but left behind a deeper understanding, a renewed sense of purpose, and the undeniable truth that sometimes the act of saving another creature, however wild, can truly save a part of oneself. If this story touched your heart, comment 1 if you're moved or 0 if you're speechless. Thanks for watching until the end. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more magical stories. See you next time.